Good day, everyone. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment in American history, the rise of political parties from George Washington's presidency all the way to Andrew Jackson's era. Now, the founding of the United States was based on the idea of unity, but as the country grew and expanded, political divisions began to emerge. These divisions were not just about different opinions, but about fundamentally different visions for the future of the nation. Political parties, which we often take for granted today, became the battleground for these conflicts, and the history of their rise is filled with controversies that would shape the nation for centuries to come. Let's start with George Washington, who is often considered the father of the country. When he became president in 1789, he was determined to avoid the factionalism that had plagued many European countries. Washington's vision for the United States was one of unity, a nation where citizens put their common interests above political divisions. However, this ideal would soon be tested. Washington was deeply skeptical of political parties. In his farewell address in 1796, he famously warned against the dangers of political factions, calling them the alternate domination of one faction over another, a mortal disease to public good. He feared that parties would sow discord, divide the nation, and create loyalty to party over country. Despite Washington's warnings, political parties began to take shape almost immediately. The roots of these parties lie in the ideological battles between two key figures of the early republic, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, believed in a strong central government, a robust national economy, and close ties with Britain. He was the leader of the Federalist Party, which was pro-business and believed in a more industrialized future for the U.S. On the other hand, Jefferson, the Secretary of State, had a vision of a more agrarian society and was wary of a powerful federal government. Jefferson's followers, who would eventually form the Democratic-Republican Party, favored states' rights and saw the country's future in farming and rural life. This ideological rift wasn't just about policies. It was a fundamental debate about what kind of nation America would become. Hamilton's Federalists wanted to create a system that mirrored British influence and aristocratic stability, while Jefferson's Democratic Republicans championed a more decentralized democratic vision that prioritized the rights of the individual and the power of the states. As both men grew in power, their visions clashed, and it didn't take long for these ideological divisions to crystallize into political parties. By the time Washington left office, the first political party system was already in place. The Federalists, led by Hamilton, were the dominant party during the 1790s, but Jefferson's Democratic Republicans began to gain ground. This period was marked by fierce debates and sharp political battles. One of the most significant moments came during the presidency of John Adams, Washington's successor. Adams, a Federalist, had to contend with growing opposition from the Democratic Republicans, particularly during the French Revolution. The Federalist Party, fearing the rise of radical ideas, passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, which sought to suppress dissent and limit the power of immigrants. These acts became deeply controversial and were seen as a direct attack on the First Amendment, leading to outrage from Jeffersonian Republicans. By the election of 1800, the country was in the midst of a bitter political battle between the Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Jefferson won that election in what was called the Revolution of 1800, which marked a peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties. This peaceful transition helped solidify the legitimacy of political parties despite Washington's warnings. After the War of 1812, the Federalist Party began to lose influence. The war had been unpopular, and many of the party's leaders had been associated with opposition to the war effort. The Democratic Republicans, under James Monroe, effectively dominated the political landscape during what is known as the Era of Good Feelings. During this time, the idea of political parties seemed to fade, and there was a brief period of one-party dominance. But it didn't last long. As the country expanded and its issues became more complex, new divisions began to emerge, particularly over issues like slavery and westward expansion. A crucial turning point in the history of American political parties came with the election of 1824. This election saw a four-way race between Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. Although Jackson won the popular vote, none of the candidates secured a majority in the Electoral College, which led to a decision in the House of Representatives. In what was dubbed the corrupt bargain, John Quincy Adams was selected as president, and in return, he appointed Henry Clay as his Secretary of State. Jackson's supporters were furious, feeling that the will of the people had been ignored. This controversial outcome helped solidify Jackson's base of support, particularly among those who felt excluded from the political process. In response to this perceived injustice, Jackson's supporters rallied together, forming what would become the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party grew out of the movement for Jacksonian Democracy, which sought to expand voting rights to more white men and reduce the power of elites. Jackson's followers believed that the common man should have a larger role in government, and they were determined to take down what they saw as the corrupt aristocratic establishment. The formation of the Democratic Party marked the beginning of the second party system, and it was rooted in Jackson's populist appeal and his desire to create a stronger executive branch. By the 1830s, a new party system was emerging. Andrew Jackson, a hero of the War of 1812, had become a powerful political figure and was the leader of the Democratic Party. Jackson's vision was one of a strong executive branch, limited government, and a focus on expanding democracy to more Americans. His opponents, who were initially part of the Democratic-Republicans, formed the Whig Party. The Whigs were united by their opposition to Jackson and his policies, but they were divided on many other issues. Jackson's presidency was marked by fierce controversy. His battle against the Bank of the United States was seen by many as an overreach of executive power. His policies toward Native Americans, especially the forced relocation of tribes in what became known as the Trail of Tears, were deeply unpopular and viewed by many as morally wrong. Jackson's supporters, however, saw him as a champion of the common man, standing up to elites and entrenched powers. Meanwhile, the Whigs were critical of Jackson's strong-willed leadership and what they saw as his authoritarian tendencies. The political battles between Jackson and the Whigs culminated in the election of 1836, where Jackson's chosen successor, Martin Van Buren, won the presidency. However, the Whigs would go on to become a major force in American politics, particularly in the 1840s and 1850s, until their eventual collapse over the issue of slavery. The rise of political parties in America was anything but smooth. From the very beginning, the emergence of factions divided the nation along ideological lines, from the Federalists and Democratic-Republicans to the Democrats and Whigs. These parties didn't just shape policy, they shaped the very identity of the country. While Washington's warnings about the dangers of political parties were certainly prescient, the reality of American politics was that parties were inevitable. They provided a structure for political debate, but they also entrenched divisions that sometimes led to deep social and political conflicts. From the creation of the nation to the rise of Jacksonian democracy, political parties have been central to the evolution of the United States. And though today we may look at the political landscape and wonder how things became so polarized, it's important to remember that the controversies and struggles we see now have deep roots in the very foundation of the nation. The rise of political parties, from Washington to Jackson, was as much about defining who we are as a country as it was about figuring out how we would govern ourselves. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of American political history. Hopefully, it's given you a deeper understanding of how the rise of political parties helped shape the nation we live in today.